Strong, healthy citizens and communities speaking our languages and celebrating who we are and our history and our ancestral homelands, working together, managing our lands and resources as a self-sufficient, self-governing nation.
The age of the population were people that were very definitely affected by things like residential school, because that experience meant that we had as much unlearning to do as we had to do of how are we going to move forward. So much damage had been done in terms of what I always refer to as the thread that is woven through all of us as Ktunaxa people and how thin it had become.
The resort here, the casino golf course resort, it was the residential school. It closed down in 1970. Both of my parents, my mother and my father, were students here, and it sat just empty for the longest time. There was a big push with people in our nation to want to do something with this place. A lot of people just wanted to blow it up. Really, they just wanted to destroy the place.
It's really important for Ktunaxa, and all First Nations for that matter, to know who we are as people and what our relationship is to the land. Our creation story can go on for days and days and days about our relationship to our land in a particular place. But embedded with that are a lot of, I guess you could say, morals of the story on how we we behave as people and how we shouldn't behave. I truly believe our creation story is the foundation of who we are as a people, and it can guide us throughout our lifetime.
This creation story of ours, written in English, and that was the first too, right, for our nation, in that ours is an oral culture like many of the nations, you know, in North America. So the creation story actually being written down, it really gave us kind of our boundaries, our traditional boundaries of our nation, so that, you know, when it came to the early 90s and the modern day treaty process, that story was already there. That was already had been a part of our declarations that had been made in the 80s, as far as, you know, our traditional territory, and so that was ready to go, you know, as part of this the intent to negotiate.
When I was I wasn't even old enough to vote yet in band elections, and I lived in the community of Ktunaxa, and I remember saying to, one time being at a meeting and watching the council members at work, and one of the things that they were doing was they were approving a budget. I didn't really know a heck of a lot about budgets. I didn't even really know a heck of a lot about their business, but I remember the document being there, and it was all filled in. And I remember thinking to myself, well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And I said something to them, and they're just kind of looking at me like, why are you even raising this as an issue? And I said, well, you know, isn't this the band's money? Shouldn't you guys be deciding on how this is going to be spent? And they're sort of going, oh, yeah, well, maybe. And then they, you know, what are we going to do about it? And I said, well, at least should write somebody a letter. And we didn't know who. I mean, I didn't know who, whatever. And then they said, well, who's going to do that? And then all of a sudden, all eyes are on me. And I said, oh, well, I'll see what I can do. But I remember that was sort of my first involvement in sort of quote unquote government. I've always said to myself, as long as I believe in it and I can be positive about it, then I've got something to contribute.
We as First Nations people, because we don't have a lot of capacity in-house, we bring people from the outside and then they're like guests, and so we don't want to tell them the truth about what's really going on in our communities. We don't want to show anybody our dirty laundry. But that's what we really have to deal with. And so when Angela came in, I knew there was going to be this tendency to, you know, not really get to the bottom line of everything. And at that point, I actually renamed the acronym SWOT, the SWOT analysis, where strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats is usually what people know it as. I said, how about we call it Start With Our Truth? Start with our truth, SWOT. And so what that really meant was having to identify and address those things that were underlying issues, some very foundational issues, things that if we didn't deal with, we're never going to get anywhere.
Each community has their own vision. However, at that point in time, we didn't have a nation vision.
How we decided on where we wanted to go was the development of the Ktunaxa Nation vision statement.
But the statement into itself is not where it ends. That's just now the beginning.
The vision statement is important to us. We feel it covers a lot of our inherent responsibilities. For example, the vision statement has 4 main components to it. And what I was told from an elder at one time, first there needs to be land. When there is land, it allows people to be there. When there's land and people, then becomes a culture. A culture forms out of that. When you have land, people, and culture, you'll need a way of governing yourselves. And from that traditional knowledge, I guess that's the platform for each of the 4 pillars. We have a lands and resource sector, we have a social sector, a traditional knowledge sector, and a way to govern ourselves.
The elected officials from the communities, each one of them has an appointment to one of the sector councils. So we have a social investment sector council that oversees all of the resources that are attached to the definition of strong, healthy citizens and communities. We have a traditional knowledge and language sector council that oversees everything to do with this, who we are and speaking our languages. We have the corporate sector council, which oversees the working together piece, so supporting the other parts of the government to do the best job. We have the economic investment and planning sector council that oversees that function, land stewardship council that oversees that particular function. So each vision statement element has a council now that's structured to deal with that, which is really somewhat based on a traditional model of governance. As we would, define a principle or something, then we would test it out in community or go vice versa. So it was an iterative process, and we're still in that. That's why our treaty process has taken so long. And next Monday we have another citizens meeting where we'll have 200 or 300 citizens in a room to make decisions on the treaty process as it advances. And that's the process that we unfolded from the beginning, a citizenship-based process.
By including everyone in the process, or as many people as possible in the process, is well worth it. You get a much better product, you have a lot more people committed to the vision, and I think everyone works towards that vision. Our process has helped to improve communications between our citizens and our leadership. It's also helped our citizens realize that a leadership position is not just, it isn't what they traditionally thought it was. It encompasses a lot more. I'm finding that they're being a lot more selective in who they're nominating and who they're actually electing. They're electing people who they feel will help to reach the vision or visions of each of the communities as well.
Sometimes people in meetings will question, they'll say, well, we've talked about this before. Why are we talking about this again, right? And you need to talk about things over and over again to make sure that everybody's coming along so that you don't leave anybody behind.
The term self-government was first sort of starting to find its way into conversation round and round, and I would kept coming back at different ways trying to explain this. Finally, this man in the back of the room puts up his hand and he says, "Oh, so you mean we get to decide how we're going to live?" And again, that was like, it was just another hallelujah moment, because when he said that, and then the rest of the people around the room started, "Oh, okay, if that's what you're talking about, we're in,"
Nation building certainly doesn't happen overnight. It is a very long process.
It's something that all First Nations need to have the opportunity to advance themselves so that we indeed can shed some shackles.
Almost everybody knows there's a nation vision. Now, they probably can't recite it in the same way, but they'll probably pick out a piece that's important to them in that. So pretty much everybody knows that. We don't have the same isms we've had before. We now have Ktunaxa citizens, so there's not the entitlements that used to be there around being status on reserve or what have you. There's a different thinking there. There's a more of an inclusivity. So there's that feeling of belonging has spread out a lot further. Our people are actually starting to think self-governing. So they're starting to really believe that Nike up thing. You know, they've seen it in action and they're starting to actually follow it. So you'll have young people being able to stand up and say, you know, we are a self-governing people. We have some young people who are actually interested in being part of the government now, where before it was like they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Because there used to be a lot of ugliness attached to a lot of that work historically. So there's a new energy being born around it. People say, well, what makes you different? I said, because we just do it. We just do it. We don't ask for permission. If we think it's right for ourselves, we move ahead with it.
So one of the projects I think is exciting and innovative for Ktunaxa Nation is gathering a baseline information, what we're calling a Ktunaxa census. And it's available for anybody who identifies themselves as a Ktunaxa citizen, and they have an opportunity to fill out the census forms, and will give us the opportunity to do strategic and action planning into the future, and be able to measure the results after, say, a 3 to 5 year period, and find out where we've succeeded and find out where we need to put more effort into.
I fully believe in the process. I fully believe in the process of strategic planning and taking the time to do it. It was strategic planning, strategic visioning that brought us to a vision statement for the Ktunaxa Nation. And that vision statement has been with us for over a decade now. And I think that there are pieces in our vision statement that we can look at now in its physical form in our communities.
I understand that you had opportunity to view the reconciliation sculpture that's up at the Cranbrook Airport. That whole project started as a result of an artist's dream, a non-Aboriginal artist's dream, who made contact with the city of Cranbrook and raised the suggestion with the mayor. So he liked the idea and told the artist that he then had to come and talk to us. So the approach was made, and we brought it to our elders advisory group with the idea, and it was totally embraced. We then worked towards the unveiling, which took place June 21st, 2010, National Aboriginal Day. So to me, it's little things like that are going to help us to actually advance our agenda in terms of how we relate to our neighbors, because that's an important part of it. Because as the famous court case says, we're all here to stay.
We have a very large young person population within Ktunaxa Nation. And in order for us to be self-governing, we have to start developing capacity development, I guess you could say, skills inventory to grooming people to succeed roles for the nation in terms of governance capacity. And that, I believe, is the key to the future.
I remember that when the plane lands in Hawaii, the flight attendant comes on, they always start with aloha and welcome to Hawaii. Doesn't matter what language might be their first language. So why can't, whenever an airplane lands here, the way that I see it is that the flight attendant gets their microphone and comes on and says, "Keiso Kyokit," and welcome to the territory of the Ktunaxa people.